Hello and welcome to Recap the podcast with me, Lucy Wheeler. Recap stands for Research in Education, Child Development and Parenting, and our mission is to embrace everyone and make everyone feel at home and part of a supportive community. Here on the podcast, you will find stories from parents, child development professionals, researchers, early childhood educators, and many, many more. So pop on those headphones while you walk the dog, grab a snippet during your lunch break or while your baby sleeps, and enjoy listening to some incredible stories from some truly amazing people. Welcome to Recap. Hello and a huge warm welcome to my guest today, Melanie Grabowski, who I'm very excited to chat to today about all things Montessori, autism and home education. So before we head into that, I just want to tell you a little more about our guest. Melanie is a parent of two neurodivergent teens, a Montessori practitioner and higher level teaching assistant and specialist support practitioner for children with additional needs. She has worked in classrooms since 2011, starting with Montessori kindergarten in Austria, then at a Montessori school primarily with children aged 3 to 9 in Australia, before moving to England where she worked in mainstream primary and lower secondary. Her undergraduate degree is in psychology, and she recently completed a master's degree in education with Montessori. Melanie is also a home educating mum since September 2020, supporting her children through GCSEs and now A levels. She has a strong interest in learning environments that align with developmental needs, and more particularly for neurodivergent children and young people. I'm so excited to have our conversation today, Melanie. So a huge welcome to you. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Lucy. Hi. Yeah, good, thank you. It's nice to be on your podcast today.
It's lovely to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to chat to us. So, you're a mum of two.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find that transition to becoming a mum for the first time and then going on and having a second child?
It was a long time ago now, Lucy. 18 years ago. Can I even remember?
Wow.
But I think the transition to motherhood or parenthood is one of the most significant transitions you can have in your life. I think it's probably the most difficult.
Absolutely.
And I think it continues, actually. I'm still transitioning into being a parent of teens. I don't think that transition ends. It just changes all the time as you go along. Yeah, but people tell you, don't they, when you're pregnant, what to expect and how hard things are going to be, but you don't really know until it hits you. So I remember it's quite a shock to the system, and it takes a while to find yourself again, your new identity as a mum. That takes a really long time. It just doesn't happen quickly at all. I just remember the first 6 weeks for me. I mean, it sounds really negative, but I think it's important to acknowledge how hard it actually is. I remember the first 6 weeks for me feeling like I was in a tunnel, and I'm wondering whether there was actually a light at the end of it. It was quite difficult that first 6 weeks. And I remember a friend coming over, actually. I think my daughter was 4 weeks old, and she bought me a gift, which was a really beautiful photograph of over the river of the skyline of where we were living, taken on the dawn of when my daughter was born, because there was a photographer that did this. He took a photo every morning at every dawn, and then you could buy it on the day that your child was born. So she bought me this, and I unwrapped the present, and my daughter was 4 weeks old, and I just cried, because not just because it was such a beautiful thing, but I looked at her and I said, I never knew it was going to be so hard. It's so hard, isn't it? And I just broke down. And so I mean, that's very early transition, but I just remember that difficulty, and then the everyone giving you advice and telling you what you should be doing, and all of that. I'm sure you'd remember that too.
Absolutely.
And I used to look at other mums and think, they'd have their hair done and the makeup done, and I think, how on earth are you doing that? Because I remember spending, I don't know how many weeks, but I had two places in the house where I would spend time. And it was one, I was on the couch breastfeeding, and the other was in the baby's room trying to get her to sleep. That was my life. The couch and the nursery, and that was it. And when do you have a shower? When do you eat? Yeah, it was kind of, and then that terrifying feeling of when your husband goes back to work or when your partner goes back to work, and you're on your own with this tiny, precious little human that's completely dependent on you, and you have full responsibility. And it's, I remember that being really scary.
It's so scary, isn't it?
Being left on your own. Yeah, there's quite a lot of fear and worry in it. Well, there was for me. I remember going to a friend, and she had a little boy around the same time as I had my daughter, and he just used to sleep. And he was asleep. He'd sleep for 3 hours, and then he'd wake up and have a feed, and he'd, for about half an hour, and then he'd go back to sleep. And she had all this time, and she did some painting, and she did some mosaic tiling, and she did all these things.
Gosh.
And I just don't have any of that. So my daughter just didn't sleep in the day. She slept well at night, but not in the day. Yeah, and you just question yourself so much, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when I had my son came along nearly 3 years afterwards, and everyone says, well, you've done it now, you've done it once already, you know what you're doing, it'll be easy this time. And in some ways it is. You've gathered those skills that you never had before.
Yeah.
But this is a completely different little person.
Yeah.
He was totally different. So it was like starting all over again, like I'd never done it before. Yeah. So it was tough, but you fall into a bit of a rhythm, don't you? And you find out what works and how to go about things. I remember, I think for my daughter, it was 3 months really. It was when she got to about 3 months old that things started to get a little bit easier, and I found I could settle into being a mum a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But like as I said, it just keeps changing, and that transition keeps happening that you have to go through continuously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that you've openly spoken about the challenges kind of straight off the bat, because it is hard, and you're right. Like my daughter turns 18 this year, and so it was 18 years ago for me that I kind of went through that transition. And it was so tough. And I remember, I always tell people the story of the first night home with her, and I had been that parent that was like, I am going to breastfeed exclusively. I'm not going to use any dummies. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do that. I think it's fair to say typical first time mum that thought that I knew exactly what I wanted and that it was going to be a bit more straightforward than it was. And I couldn't breastfeed. I breastfed for like the first day, but she wouldn't latch on properly. And I didn't really get very good support from the hospital. So whenever I struggled in the hospital, they just latched her on for me rather than showing me how to do it. So when I got home, I couldn't get her to latch on for love nor money. And she was screaming because she was so hungry. I was crying because I was so distraught that she was screaming. And I remember this moment on our first night home, and her dad was sitting on the end of the bed with his head in his hands. I was sitting in the bed holding her, sobbing. She was screaming, and we were like, what have we done? Why have we done this?
I remember that. Hard. I remember thinking that, and then you feel awful for thinking that. Yeah. I remember thinking, just sobbing as well at my husband, and thinking and saying, are we ever going to get to watch a film again? Are we ever going to be able to sit here in the evening? Because it's relentless. It's around the clock, isn't it? And I remember the first night home. It was so frightening. And the same, with the breastfeeding. I mean, I did breastfeed her till she was 1, luckily, but it wasn't easy. And at first she had reflux, and I had some difficulty, but I did get some good help from the hospital with her. I didn't so much with my son, but I think when you have your second one, people just dump you.
Yeah, you're supposed to be a pro now.
Second time, you've done it before. You're all right. You don't need this. I did have a completely different experience as far as support goes with my son, in comparison to my daughter. I don't know if that's a common thing, but that first night, screaming out of hunger, and I just couldn't get the hang of it. I think it was my birthday, the day after I left hospital, and my husband bought me a breast pump. That was my birthday present.
Best birthday present ever.
Welcome to motherhood.
This is how it's going to go from now.
Next year you can have a frying pan.
Breast pads.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know what though? Like,
I've forgotten about that.
It's hard. It is really, really hard. And we say, it's normal to struggle. It's normal for it to feel hard. And like when you said you got to 3 months and that's when you started to settle into a routine. And when you say 3 months, you think, 3 months isn't that long. Like, that's really good. And then, but when you're in it, when you're living those 3 months, every second, every hour goes so long when you're struggling, doesn't it?
It really does. And it feels never ending, and it feels like you're never going to get there. That's what I remember, that feeling that this is my life now and I don't know how to do this. This is really hard. Yeah, after my son, I actually had postnatal depression. So I thought I'd bring that up. It's I'm not ashamed to talk about it. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And but it didn't kick in until he was about 5 months. It wasn't an immediate thing. Oh yeah, and it didn't last very long, but it was. I did have to go to some therapy, and I was offered medication for it. But yeah, he was a really difficult sleeper. He couldn't sleep, and I had lots of feeding issues with him, and I think that the lack of sleep really contributed to that. But yeah, that was a very difficult time. But yeah, I think it's important to talk about these difficult times, is it? Because you know, it's always talked about as so lovely, and it is lovely in lots of ways, but it's really hard. It's really difficult transition.
Yeah, and I think the more that we acknowledge those challenges and talk about it, that the slightly easier it is for people who then go through the challenges going, you know, I'm not alone, other people have felt like this as well. And also, like, based off of what you just said, and also knowing that if it gets to a point where you might have to seek additional help and support, if it may be going over into something like postnatal depression, things like that, because, you know, we're told that the baby blues, the first couple of weeks after having the baby, and the typical baby blues, this is all normal. And I definitely had the baby blues. I was so emotional the first few weeks after I had her. And I remember I was supposed to have, you know, you have that kind of routine visit from the health visitor. I mean, it's probably all different now. This was 18 years ago. The system's probably different, but I had a health visitor coming around like 2 weeks after or 10 days after. And her dad had then gone out for some drinks with his friends to celebrate the baby and everything. So I was home alone. And the health visitor didn't turn up, and it was getting later and later, and I was getting myself more and more worked up. And I'd already been struggling with her with sleep and feeding, things like that. So I had like my list of questions, and she didn't turn up. And I remember getting into such a state, and then I rang them and I said, like, I've got an appointment. And she said, oh, sorry, someone was off sick. I've got like double the workload. I'm not going to make it Tuesday. And I just broke down on the phone, and she was so apologetic. And I was like, no, it's fine. It's just I had all of this built up emotion because I was worrying and I really wanted this appointment, and she wasn't able to make it. And I was just sobbing down the phone to her. And she came the next day. She came the very next day and came and saw me, and I was absolutely fine. And I was like, I'm so sorry about last night. I was just really emotional, and everything got on top of me. But that's kind of, you know, it's normal. And it's when it goes on for longer periods of time and you kind of can't find a way out, it's so important to then acknowledge that actually it's okay if I ask for help. I think there's a lot of stigma, well, there was a lot of stigma around there, wasn't there, about asking for help, worrying about they would worry about your capability with the baby and things like that, so people didn't. But I don't know if you agree, but I think it's a lot more acceptable now. People are talking a lot more about it now.
I think they definitely are. Yeah. I think definitely. Although what you said about the health visitor not turning up, that sounds very familiar these days.
Oh, really?
Being short-staffed and, I don't know. I'm just assuming because of everything's quite difficult, isn't it, with in terms of getting support and, you know, the services and things. But yeah, definitely with mental health and all of that kind of stuff, I think people are much more open to talking about it. I mean, that was a long time ago, and I'm not sure how, you know, women having children these days, how available that support is. I hope it is. You know, in these times of kind of, you know, when the services are being cut and loss of funding and things, I just hope that it is actually. So even just talking to friends, somebody, just reaching out to somebody if you're in that position.
But I think as well, like, there now plays a part with things like social media, podcasts and things like that, where people are talking about it, because it almost normalizes it. So it takes away that added stress of I'm alone and I'm the only one feeling like this. At least there's that additional layer of acknowledgement of actually other people go through this as well. It's still hard. They still need professional support, but I guess because we're talking about it more, same with all sorts of mental health and health in general, you know, we are talking a lot more as a society about things. I don't know that that's always a good thing, but I mean, that's a whole other story.
We'll save that for another time.
But we get through it. Our children grow up, and you quite openly talk about the fact that your children are neurodivergent, both of them. Has this changed the way that you've parented at all? Kind of, what kind of challenges do you feel you've had to navigate in these years?
It has. It's had to, because you have to change the way that you do things according to how your child presents and what they need. But before I had children, I'd been working with children for 14 years. So I felt that I knew children really well, and I felt that I was really comfortable with children. I knew the world of children. So I felt like I was coming into motherhood really well prepared, actually. But I had no not much experience with babies, so that's from 3-year-olds to 12. That was my, the age group that I kind of worked with. So I kind of had some ideas already, and because I was already interested in psychology and child development in particular, I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of things anyway. So I kind of had, like you were saying, a preconceived idea of what kind of parent I wanted to be, and also looking at my own childhood, I was painfully shy and no confidence, and not many friends. I was very much like that, and I was adamant that my children were going to be totally different from me. They were going to be up there on stage singing and dancing and having lots of friends and all of these things. And so what do I need? What kind of parent do I need to be to bring that out in them, to bring this, confidence, this self-esteem out in them? So I did read a lot about all of that, parenting and child development, before I had children, and then when I was pregnant, and it's never stopped, actually. I just carried on with it. But when they were little, I didn't know about, I don't know if neurodivergence was a word. This was in 2006. I'd never heard of it. And I didn't really know about autism apart from the stereotypical, perception of what autism is. I did have a friend with an autistic daughter when we were living in Austria. She very, if you can say classical autism, I don't know if you can say that, but you know what I mean? It was very observable, her behaviour. She was nonverbal. And that's what I thought autism was. So I didn't really understand the spectrum at all. I didn't really know what special education needs were, even. Like, I'd heard of it, but it wasn't something that, was in my immediate world, if you know what I mean. So when they were little, I guess it was, for my daughter, she was very anxious, and she was very sensitive to sound, to noises. And in groups of people, her behavior would change, and she hated people being dressed up, like the Wiggles and Dorothy the Dinosaur, and you go to like a children's party or a shopping centre or something, and there'd be a mascot there. She couldn't stand anything like that. She was terrified of that kind of thing. And then when she was about 3, maybe it was a bit before that, but I vividly remember the first time I saw it was this freeze response that she had. She was at like a kinder gym class, and everything was fine, and then all the kids started to run around playing a game, and she just completely froze. And I thought, what's she doing? And that's the first time I saw that. And then obviously it kept happening. So there were quite a few things going on up until, all through primary. Anxiety was a main issue for my daughter, but I never once thought about autism. No one mentioned it to me. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a thing. And then with my son, his main difficulty was sleeping. He could never sleep, and he still can't. He still struggles with that. And
my daughter's the same.
And with food, eating.
Yeah.
So I did breastfeed him for the first few months, and I only discovered this recently. It was when I introduced solid food when it became really difficult. He couldn't eat it. He had such difficulty with food, and that lasted. Toddlers go through this picky phase. It's natural. They all go through it, and then they come out through the other side. It's just a completely natural developmental thing for them to do. But he didn't, and he got to about 4. I think when he was 3, he said we would eat meat at the table, and he never ate that. And he said when he was 3, we had asked him why he didn't want it, and he said chickens are supposed to walk around and fish are supposed to swim. And he was 3. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe he's a natural vegetarian. And I didn't think much of it. And then another year passed by, and he still wasn't eating, and he wasn't eating. He hardly ate anything, and the same things he ate all the time. He wasn't eating meat, and he said, and we asked, spoke to him again about it, and he said, I just want all the animals of the world to be safe.
Oh, so bless him.
Yeah, he said these really quite insightful things for a little boy. But I started to think when he was about 5. I don't think this is him just being fussy or picky. I think there's something psychological going on there with the food, because he just could not take different types of food, and he would almost he would gag on it, and be quite distressed about the food. And obviously I went to a nutritionist, and I got the advice of, make it fun, make a face out of the fruit, and all these kind of, put it in a different container, all these things that you're told. But now I know he has it's sensory avoidance, taste, texture and smell.
Right.
And that's why he has this difficulty with food. And there's a word for that. I don't know if you've heard of ARFID.
Yes, I came across that last year.
Yeah, acronym for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And so there's a few different reasons why it occurs, but sensory aversion is one of them. So so for him, my biggest challenge was the sleeping and the eating. And there were other things, but it was judgment from family, and mostly family and friends, where it must be because you're doing something wrong. It must be because you're not doing the things that everybody else is doing. Because obviously by then I had discovered Montessori. That really did influence the way I parent also. And so I was doing things a little bit differently, and they were going to a Montessori early learning and a school. So I was doing something differently to what everyone else in my family and friends were doing. So it was, of course, it's because you're doing that. It's because you're not socializing. They're not going out enough. They're not going to enough parties or things. But it wasn't that I wasn't trying. I tried really hard to get, my daughter in particular to, she really struggled at parties or social gatherings. She'd go off and read a book by herself when there were other children there, all those kind of things. But I didn't know why, and I didn't know what it all was or where it was coming from. So I just had this, I just had to try so hard all the time. I just felt like I had to try so hard all the time. I think that's one of the challenges. And I remember looking at other parents thinking, I'm doing what you're doing, but how come it's working for you and it's not working for me? And so
it must feel so disheartening as a parent and exhausting.
It's exhausting. And one of my friends said to me when my daughter was on the pathway for diagnosis after we'd moved to England, and I was talking to her about it, and she said, it makes complete sense because you've always had to parent so intensely.
Yeah.
And that's the first time someone had validated that effort that I felt like I'd always had to put in. So, that someone had seen that, because I felt that. And like you said, it was just exhausting. And and you compare yourself, and you just end up full of self-doubt. Why are my children like this? And I've got all this background of, this is how I'm going to do this, and this is what the research says, this is what all of that. And I did all of that. I was all really prepared, and then it all kind of fell down.
You can't prepare for it, can you?
No.
You can't. I mean, you can prepare to an extent for parenthood. But it is very much what's that phrase? A kind of ride in the seat of your pants or something. You just have to go with it.
Fly by the seat of your pants.
The fly rate, that's it. You just have to kind of take each day as it comes, and even like you're saying, you have 2 children. And, you're the same human being. You birthed both of these children, but yet they're completely
totally
different. So even that, you have to just, And I hear that all the time with people. Obviously, I've only got 1 child, so I haven't got that lived experience of that comparison. But everyone that I speak to, I don't think I've come across anybody that says my 2 children are carbon copies of each other in every way. There are definitely differences. And when you add in these additional challenges as well, it takes its toll on the parent as well to be able to navigate it, whilst also having that, I guess, feeling of guilt that it's not going the way that they planned. And if you've got people around you saying, why are your children like that? Oh, it's because of something you're doing. That's just going to feed that guilt and that feeling of not being good enough, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember this was after we moved to England, and we were on the pathway for assessment and everything. And I went to an occupational therapist to fill out an initial screening for both of my children by that point, because my son was a little bit like, I still didn't think he was on the autistic spectrum 2 years after my daughter was diagnosed. Like it was all these things that were pointing towards it, but I just thought no. Anyway, I went to see the occupational therapist, and she did the evaluation of the sensory, the sensory profile. And when I went back to see her, she said, "Oh my goodness." Because she said she was showing it to one of her colleagues, and her colleague had said, "Oh my goodness, that poor mother, that she's got complete sensory avoidance on this one and complete sensory seeking on this one. And so, you know, where my daughter couldn't stand noise and loved everything to be quiet, and my son was constantly making noise and constantly singing and constantly, you know, drumming on the table or something. So yeah, it makes it so difficult. I mean, things have calmed down now. Obviously, you know, they're quite a lot older. They're one's nearly 18 and one's nearly 15. So, but yeah, those years, and you can't parent one the same as you parent the other.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about this later, but this is where some of the Montessori principles feed in to parenting, because it's about being in tune with the individual child and following the child and adapting your approach to what is needed. That really did influence me.
With the ARFID, so this is a new kind of term that I came across, as I said, last year. So I'm still learning about it, and it's fascinating because some of the people that I follow online as well that have children that experience ARFID, and it's heartbreaking to see some of the negative comments and that are put towards these parents of saying, you're not trying hard enough. It's because you're giving in to them, and not making them eat the right foods and things like that. But did you get a lot of support in terms of, is there like support groups? Is there somewhere that you can go via, your doctor, your health visitor, to get support specifically on kind of sensory things like this? I mean, back then, was there?
No. So
no.
Back then, before we moved here, so from Australia, before we moved here, I didn't know what that was at all. I only discovered that a couple of years ago, really, 3 years ago maybe. I just knew that there was something going on. It wasn't just the fact that he was being fussy or I wasn't being strict enough. I offered him everything. I did all the things that everyone tells you to do, and that other parents go, well, just do this and it works. No, it doesn't work. And because my daughter wasn't like that, so I thought, well, it can't be me, because otherwise she'd be like that too, wouldn't she? Is that how it would work? But actually, that's the first thing I went to the paediatrician about when I came here, was his eating. So I first went to a dietitian. Was it a dietitian? I went to a paediatrician and then a dietitian. And it was the paediatrician actually that mentioned autism to me then about my son. And I said, I'm not thinking that about him, but I am thinking about that about my daughter, because the head teacher at her primary school suggested it to me.
Right.
And so that was the first time. So that was 2017, the end of that. That's the first time it was suggested to me, and then I started to look into it. And that paediatrician gave me a screening questionnaire for Asperger's for my daughter, which I took home, and that kind of got the ball rolling on all of that. But I didn't know what ARFID was. I knew that sensory aversion to food was an autistic thing, and so I just thought it was related to that. I didn't know that there's actual treatment for it. There are things you can do, and I've forgotten her name now. There's an expert in England who's an expert on ARFID. I've forgotten her name. I'm pretty sure she works out of Birmingham Children's Hospital.
Okay.
I can't believe I've forgotten her name. I've got a book downstairs. I started reading about it and everything. But when I went to our local GP and community paediatrician about it, I just couldn't get any support. It was really difficult. I think he referred me to the dietitian again, which I'd already been to before 3 years, before that. And there's nothing really that they did apart from suggest supplements. But the dietitian wouldn't see him again because we've already seen him and there's nothing we can do. And then I was referred to CAMHS and they declined, and I had to push that I really had to push that. And so we actually did get an initial assessment with CAMHS, and I thought this relief of, somebody's going to see us and somebody can help, because I was really worried, because he eats five things, like count on one hand what he eats, and he eats the same thing every day. And I'm, what about his health, his internal health, and is this why he's struggling cognitively? Is this why he's getting these headaches? Is this why all these things? So I just need to try and fix this. How can I help him? So we went to CAMHS, and I had the initial assessment, and I felt really heard and I felt really validated, and I felt, okay, we're getting somewhere now. And I got the call a couple of weeks later to say, along with the letter that you get, I don't know if you're familiar with this, with the CAMHS process, to say, we don't feel he meets criteria. It's best if you tackle this on your own at home. Here are some leaflets, here are some websites. that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I felt so angry, and I cried on that phone call, and because this wasn't the first time. This was, I don't know how many years. I don't know how many appointments. I don't know how many forms I'd filled out. I don't know how many phone calls I'd had to try and get support for different various, for all these things. And I was just exhausted. And at that point, I think also they were both out of school. So we'd started home educating after the whole school attendance difficulty and the ABSA and all of that, and the mental health problems with that. So I was just at the end of my tether, and I just thought,
yeah, I can imagine.
Can't somebody help me? So then I was referred to an online step-by-step program, and I did that. I mean, everything it feels to me, I don't know what it feels like to other parents, but certainly down where I am in the country, I feel that you are just re-referred to your own, you're left to your own devices. Here is an online thing, here is a leaflet, look this up. So I just felt like I had to become an occupational therapist, a speech and language therapist, a counsellor, a psychologist, all in one person, trying to support both my kids in different ways over the last 7 years. So yeah, it's been exhausting journey. That's quite a long answer to that question, I think.
No, it's all...
I don't remember what the question was in the first place.
You did answer it, don't worry. And what about now? How are they both kind of coping day to day now? How are you coping now that they're a bit older? Is it a little bit easier? Do you feel like you're getting a bit more support?
It is. Yeah. I don't know about support. That's still not really readily available, but I feel like we've just come through the other side. My daughter, after being home educated for 3 years through GCSEs, did go to college. It didn't work out. She was there for 5 months. So she's now doing A-levels at home. She's very happy. She's much happy at college. For 5 months was so difficult. So she's much happier. She's in a really good place. She's out socializing. She's going to some parties. She's she's enjoying herself. We still have the similar difficulties, but I think there's she's reached a point where she knows how to manage them. She knows how to manage what she can and can't do, and what, if she goes out socializing one day, she knows that the next day she just needs to completely have the day off and be in a quiet place and not and have that recovery, things like that. And I think what has helped her actually is, all along, even though I didn't really know about the autistic spectrum or anything, but from quite an early age, from probably about the age of 6 or maybe a bit before, we were seeing a psychologist for her anxiety, and she did a lot of work on understanding her thoughts and behaviors and all of that cognitive behavioral stuff and self-understanding. And I think all of that work that we did together throughout those years has really helped her kind of now to understand herself and
that's good,
what she can manage and what she can't manage. And she still wants to get out there and do things that perhaps are a bit beyond her maybe, but I think she'll get there. She'll find her place. And my son has been home since 2022, 2 years now, home educated. So he, a little bit through year 8, he came out of school. And it was difficult at first for him. He really struggled with the home ed because he likes to be around people, even though he's quite shy, and struggles in social situations and in places people he doesn't know and in places he's not familiar with. He likes to be around. He likes the bouncing off of other people's energy and things like that. That's the ADHD part, I think, clashing with the autism. But he's just come to a point where he's got his GCSEs next summer, and he's in a really good place. He plays football, and he's got quite a few different groups of friends now, and he goes out by himself into town, and so I just feel like we've come through a really long, difficult period, and things are looking up. So good. I feel quite good.
There's light at the end of the tunnel.
And I have a bit more time to myself now, and especially after finishing my masters, I have a lot more space because that was a big undertaking.
Yes, it's a lot of work, isn't it? So talking about that, so the work that you do, the research that you like to do, centres around kind of autism, ABSA, Montessori, as we've said. Can you first of all explain a little bit about what ABSA is, and does it differ at all from EBSA? Because I'd heard of the term EBSA, but not ABSA. I just sound like I'm saying lots of letters now.
Yeah, I know.
I'll hand over to you to explain this a bit.
I think that having children like ours, your language does become groups of letters, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it stands for anxiety-based school avoidance.
Okay.
And EBSA stands for emotionally based school avoidance. And I think those two terms are used interchangeably. If you look up some different local authority sites, some use ABSA, some use EBSA.
Okay.
I don't think they mean different things, although emotionally based might be referring to things that are beyond having neurodivergence, having a condition, I think, which causes, creates anxiety more so than it would in a neurotypical person. So I think the emotionally based one might refer to different instances where children struggle to attend school because of family difficulties, poverty, being a young carer.
Okay.
All the emotion that is created from different scenarios, maybe. But that's not, don't quote me on that. That's just my kind of take on that. Yeah. So it's a term used for school attendance difficulties, children who really struggle with attending school and school distress, experiencing distress and anxiety in the school environment. And it actually is quite dominated by neurodivergence in the literature. There's not a huge amount of research literature on it because it's an emerging field. Okay. But what is there talks about anxiety as being the most prevalent reason for school attendance difficulties among autistic and children with ADHD and neurodivergent children. So in my research, I used the anxiety-based school, and I didn't use avoidance because there's a long history of variable terminology around this. Yeah. From years and years ago, stemming, from used to be called truancy, and then school refusal. And school refusal is still used actually quite a lot. And it puts the onus on the child. It sounds as if it has a connotation that the child is being defiant and the child has a choice. And it gives an image of the child just stamping their foot and crossing their arms and saying, I'm not going. And it's so not like that at all. It's, that doesn't really describe the lived experience of it. So with all this terminology, I think this is what I found when I was doing my research, is that because there's not one concrete way of describing it or understanding it, strategies of support are variable, and there's all this misunderstanding about what creates it, and so then interventions are not really appropriate and stuff like that. So you might have heard of persistent absence. That's comes up a lot now in the media, and it's quite a cause for national concern, and the government are quite concerned about it. So there's a lot of talk about this now in educational circles. And I think this was from the year 2020, 2021, 40,000 autistic children were persistently absent from school. So persistent absence means missing 10% or more of sessions within an academic year. I don't know what that equates to in days or weeks. That's the definition of it. So dominated by neurodivergence, really. That's what I came across in my research. And there are other reasons why children struggle to attend school, but from what I found out, it's mostly to do with unmet underlying need that is perhaps not recognised or diagnosed. Yeah,
I think it is coming along now where we are looking deeper behind the actions of those children that are unable to attend school. And so back in my day when I was at school, it was called truancy. And this was something that I really struggled. And I spoke to another guest about this recently, actually. And I realise now that I was a school avoider as a child. I really struggled with anxiety as a child, and I lived 10 minutes down the road from my school, and my mum would walk me to school, and by the time she'd walked home, she'd have a message on her home answer phone saying, Lucy's in the office, she doesn't feel well, you need to come and get her. And it happened so frequently that they were like, we're not going to send you home anymore. So then I got even more worked up. So then I didn't go into school and got myself in such a state before school. So then I was absent. Throughout my primary school years, I didn't go to school lots and lots because I had big gaps of being absent. And I remember my mum saying to me, I'm going to have the truancy officer around and they're going to send me to prison if you don't go to school. Like that, it's that element of she didn't know who to ask for support. We didn't acknowledge at the time that it was because I was an anxious child, and there were probably reasons, probably to this day, that I don't know why I was so anxious about going into school. But now I think it's a lot more accepted in terms of people will ask for help, and we talk about it a lot more, don't we? Of the fact that there's, anxiety around things like that. Whereas back then, I was just a child that never went to school because I always was at home, and I think it has shifted. And it's really nice now that we're able to talk about it. And I know we joke and say, we're saying lots of letters all of the time, but because we're starting to find reasons behind things, and we're starting to try and justify and learn ways to help people cope, isn't it?
I think there is increasing understanding. But from my experience, and I've just become part of a team called Define Fine. I don't know if you've heard of Define Fine. It's a peer support, parent peer support group for parents whose children are struggling to attend school or struggling with school distress. It's on Facebook, and there's a website as well. So they have lots of information and support for parents who are going through this. But I still hear, because I'm, when you're on groups, when you have challenges like you and I have had with our children, you have lots of different groups to, for ideas and support and things, and to find out what's going on. And so reading those, I still see so many parents not really getting support or understanding from school, and just facing threats of fines and prosecution, and they're just frightened and they don't know where to go, and what should we do? So I just, even though I think awareness and understanding is increasing, I still think there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. And
I think you're right.
And when my daughter first started experiencing it properly, which is when she started secondary school, so that was 2018. I'd never heard of that term. I'd never heard of those letters. I didn't know anything about what school refusal was. I didn't know anything about that because I'd never experienced it in a Montessori school. It was never a problem, and I'd never really come across it, actually. I knew, though, that it was an environmental thing because of the experience of her being at school since the age of 2 to 10 in a different type of school, and never having that problem and thriving, essentially. And so I knew I had something to compare it to. So I knew that, but lots of parents don't have that experience to compare it to, and they still think, what is wrong with my child and what's going on with my child? And I just want to say it's not your child. If they're trying to tell you something.
And I think this leads on quite nicely actually to my next question, because you talk about in your research about home education by default, and that this has been something quite common and a challenge for families with autistic children, neurodivergent children. Can you explain a little bit about that?
You'd know, because this is your area, home education. So it is a legal right to home educate your children, and it's termed elective home education. My experience of that is parents whose children struggle at school or struggle to attend school or have school distress, they keep persisting and trying everything. School will put adjustments in, or maybe they won't put adjustments in, or keep trying, and then they get to a point where, and this is because my research focuses on a particular subgroup of autistic children. So it's so broad, the autistic spectrum. So I couldn't cover, and there's so much variability in it and individual difference. So I focused on those children who internalise their distress and anxiety at school. So pretty much go under the radar.
Okay.
Because they're not noticed, or they're overlooked, or they don't say anything, or they just hold it all in. They're academically capable, so they're doing quite well academically. So they're not really disturbing anyone. They're not disrupting anything. So nothing really happens. It's those children that I focused on. And you get to a point where your child can't, this is what happened with me, your child just can't go to school. Get to a point where they cannot cope anymore, and they can't go. And so you have meetings with school. They try part-time timetables, they try all these different things. And so, then you're given a choice. So you need to be bringing them in because the school they have to tick the attendance box. And you as a parent are thinking, well, I can't do that because that's damaging them. That's their mental health is just rock bottom, and that's not an option. But there are no other options. There's no alternative provision is not available to them. They don't meet criteria for specialist provision. You can't afford the small private school down the road. There are no other options. So you're kind of pushed into this choice, which is a forced choice of home educating. And so it's not elective, because it's not something that you chose to do, really. It happened to you because you got to a point where you ran out of options. So some parents who have this difficulty with their children attending and not being able to attend school, their children are not attending, and this was a large majority of my research participants. They're still enrolled at school, but they're not attending, and they're not receiving any education from school or anything from the local authority. So they are providing that education themselves at home for their child when they shouldn't have to be, but they're not officially electively home educating because they're still enrolled at school, even though they're not having any education. So home education by default is a term that I found in my research from 2009 from Bradman. It was the Bradman report. Do you know about this? It was a government commissioned review of home education in England.
The Badman report.
It's mentioned in there. It's a case of home education by default, when these parents get to a point where there's no education provision available. That's where I found myself. I have a number of friends who hang on at school, hoping for something, but are still home educating because they kind of have to be.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few families through my research of similar experiences, and we actually had somebody come on the podcast talking about this exact point, and she was saying that she calls it forced home education, so FHE instead of EHE, because she was like, it's not elective, it's not a choice. I'm not going to keep sending them into somewhere that's making them ill and anxious and unwell, but I have no other option. So this is kind of what we have to do. And it is spoken about a lot in the literature, isn't it? And I think it's quite a contested terminology to use elective home education as a broad description of it, because there are a lot of families that are not choosing it, but have no other choice but to do it.
Yeah.
You've got a range of experiences in education, and particularly Montessori education. So what is it about Montessori that makes you so passionate about it and made you want to actually use that way of learning and education with your own family?
Well, it wasn't something I chose because I thought my children were different and needed something different. It's actually funny the way it came about, because before I had children, I just thought that I would just send them to the local state school. It wasn't really a big thing. I think private schooling from where I lived was quite a big deal, and people would usually talk about what school did you go to. And private schooling was kind of like the popular choice. But it's different in Australia. The private schools are subsidised by the government, so fees are a lot lower, so they're a lot more affordable, and there's a bigger range of private schools that you can go to. So there's there's lower fee paying private schools, and then there's the real kind of exclusive ones, which are much more expensive. So, but anyway, I wasn't in that camp. I was just going to go down the normal route. But when I started looking at preschools, at early learning centres for my daughter, I knew she had quite an anxious personality, and I went to look around these places, and I just they felt chaotic to me, and noisy and cluttered, and I just thought, I can't see her being able to manage with that. And so then I thought, okay, what do I do? Because I went to look at a few different ones. And then I was coaching gymnastics at the time when my daughter was a toddler. And one of the mums came up to me, she gave me a book about Montessori, and she said, why don't you have a look into this? And so I had heard of it, but I didn't really know much about it at all. And I took that away. And when I read it, obviously it was totally different to anything I'd ever come across before, to mainstream schooling. It's completely different. And so it made me think, well, it's a bit strange, it's a bit odd, but at the same time, it made sense, because it was all about, it was so child focused. It was all about the child and child development. And it was, the psychology of child development. It was all about that. So that intrigued me. And strangely enough, a 2-minute walk from my house was a Montessori school. And I'd been living in this house for 3 or 4 years, and I'd seen this small school, looks a bit different to all the other schools that, are there, but I never really paid it much attention. I thought, well, it's some kind of a school. I don't really know what it is. I didn't really think about it too much. But so that was round the corner from the house. So I went to an open day. I started reading more about Montessori, and I went to an open day. And I just immediately felt like this is the kind of educational experience I want my children to have. And I think at the time was I pregnant with my son? I can't remember, but I just felt this sense of calmness about it, and I just felt like it was so peaceful, and I just saw these children kind of engaged in purposeful activity, busy chatting with one another, but it didn't have that chaotic feel. It was structured and calm, but everyone was doing their own kind of thing, and because it was a school that catered for 3 to 18-year-olds, so I got to see every environment, every age group classroom going up, and each one was different, but each one had that same feeling. And I remember walking through, it would have been a lower primary classroom, so for 6 to 9-year-olds, and I remember seeing a little boy, he's probably about 7, doing something called a puzzle map, which is a Montessori material for learning about the continents and different countries and things like that. And it's a big piece of work. I didn't know what it was then. I just remember him doing this big puzzle continent of Europe kind of map on this huge sheet of paper, and he was just kind of sitting there, and he had slippers on, he looked really comfortable and relaxed, and we were a small group of parents wandering around. He didn't even notice us, he paid us no attention. None of the children paid us any attention. It was just this feeling of engagement, you know. And I walked away from that feeling 95% sure this is where I want my children to go to school. But I knew nobody else that was doing that. No one in my family, no friends. I hadn't spoken to my husband about it. I didn't really know that much about it. So I had this 5% doubt, thinking, it's a minority choice. It's very different. And I don't know.
It's outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure about this. It feels really good. I like the look of it. There's nothing about this that I'm seeing that makes me feel like, oh no, I don't like that.
Yeah.
So that was my initial kind of my initial experience with it, and then obviously from there I started to read more and learn about it a lot more. And my daughter she didn't start at the school, but she started at an early learning Montessori twice a week. From the age of 2 to 4. But I think what makes me feel so passionate about it is the fact that it is, because it's really hard to explain, because it's a whole complex need It's so broad and it's so depth. I couldn't explain it to you in a nutshell. I'd need another hour. I need to write a whole paper on it to send to you and read it out. But and there's so many misconceptions about it as well, because it's not a trademark name, Montessori. There are schools, it's all around the world, but there are schools which call themselves Montessori but don't really incorporate all the principles properly, or the practice properly, and they do a bit from here and a bit from there and a bit from there, and that can work. It can work well, or it can not work well. And some people will have the experience of going to Montessori school, which is not proper Montessori, and that isn't working well, and that's their
perception of it,
idea of it. They take that perception away, and it's a negative one. So then they immediately think, no, Montessori is not very good. It's not. So that's one thing to keep in mind when I'm talking about Montessori now, and in my research, I'm talking about authentic Montessori that really incorporates all the principles and pedagogy and practices of a Montessori school. But I was going to say, because in essence, Montessori education is about the child and the child's holistic development towards adulthood, and that's at the core of it. And I think that is what makes me so passionate about it, because the child is the curriculum. The child in a Montessori education, the child has our respect. Children are revered as really precious resources, and as for developing into adulthood to contribute to a society, a change makers of society. That's the core of it. So a large part of Montessori training involved observation of the child, purposeful observation, and being in tune with the child, the individual child, and what the child needs. So basically it's psychology. It's a child psychology. It's based on the psychology of development. And because I was studying psychology when my children started at the Montessori school and I started working there, I just found all these alignments between what I was learning about in psychology and what was happening in this educational setting, as opposed to what was happening in mainstream educational settings. And I was really puzzled. I thought, if we know this about child development, why are we doing that? And why aren't we doing this? So because I have such an interest in psychology, I think that's what made me feel so passionate about it. I mean, there's so much to it, but I think the essence of it is the fact that it's based on, the psychology of child development, and which changes throughout each developmental stage, and the environment adapts to that developmental stage. So I've just got a quote here from Maria Montessori, and I've put this in my research as well, because when she developed it, she came to it with no preconceived ideas, purely based on observation of children. So she set things up for them and observed how they interacted, and that was what it was based on. She had studied psychology, she was a doctor. So she said the basis of everything I did was psychological, and the results of that were pedagogical. So I just really like that, because she's coming from a place of the psychology of children and then developing a pedagogy from that, rather than developing a curriculum and then trying to get the child to fit into that,
to fit into it.
So I think that basically is what makes me feel so passionate about it, in a nutshell. If that is a nutshell.
You can have that. That was a semi nutshell. So tell us about your research, because I find it fascinating, because you've shared some bits with me and I've been able to read through it, and I find it fascinating how you're incorporating what they call the Montessori dynamic triangle and the good autism practice, which is set up by the Autism Education Trust to build this inclusive and enabling environment for young people. So the combination of the two I find really fascinating. So can you explain a little bit about the research that you did and how that plays out?
So it was part of my master's dissertation, the research that I did, and it was inspired by, obviously, my own experience of having autistic children who experienced difficulties attending school, and then my own experience with a different type of learning environment. So it was inspired by that lived experience. And when I started researching, so I should explain the Montessori dynamic triangle. That is,
yes, please.
That is actually at the core of Montessori education. So that is the dynamic interaction between the child, the adult, and the prepared environment. So the child, the fully trained adult, and the prepared environment. So the interaction between those three, that's what it's based on. And there are some really core elements to it. There's the mixed age groupings. Montessori has mixed age groupings, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, and so on, all the way up to 18. And the mixed age groupings and the 3-hour uninterrupted work cycle in a Montessori educational environment, which is, in the morning, the children, so it's an autonomous learning environment where children choose their own work, and the teacher takes the role of a guide or a facilitator. It's not the teacher at the front, it's not whole class teaching. It's so the dynamic triangle is those three: child, adult, and the actual environment. And when I started looking through research, I was reading, it's called Developing Excellence in Autism Practice. I was reading that book by Karen Goldberg. I was reading through that, and she said in there what autistic learners really need, what's really important, is this interaction between child, adult, and environment. And that kind of really struck me, because I thought, well, that's the core of Montessori. That's what the framework, that's what it's based on. So I used that dynamic triangle as a framework for the rest of the research and based it around that. And then when I was looking through good autism practice, I found the 8 principles of good autism practice through the Autism Education Trust set out by them. And I was looking at it thinking, because of my own experience, all of this is inherent in a good Montessori setting. And so that's where I went with that. But I didn't want it to just be my own perspective. So I did because part of my research was my own personal reflective self-narrative of lived experience of being a parent of children in a Montessori setting, and then experiencing ABSA in a mainstream setting, and what makes one setting work and the other not, that kind of thing. But I didn't want it all to be about from my perspective, so I did an online questionnaire. So I had 34 participants in that one, parent participants, reflecting on their experiences of having autistic children who experience difficulties at attending school or being at school, and what their experiences are like in a mainstream school, and asking them what are the disabling aspects, what do they feel are the disabling aspects of their child's learning environment. And from that I came up with 4 themes, which was, because it was parents could comment on their on their own experiences and things, so I analysed that, and the 4 themes were fear, lack of autonomy, lack of connection and trust, and pressure and overwhelm. So these 4 themes came out from all the responses around what were the disabling aspects of the learning environment. So I flipped that and I looked at what's the opposite of that. And again, all the things that are opposite of that are inherent to Montessori kind of learning environments. And then I also asked questions around what would you consider to be an enabling learning environment if it were available. So I listed lots of different things I also took it from the literature, what works in the literature for autistic learners. So I came at it from lots of different places. So it wasn't just me saying, this is my experience, so to give it a broader, to more generalizable lens. So I looked at what works in the literature for autistic learners. I took the parents' responses. I took the 8 principles of good autism practice, and I put that all together, and I made these alignments then with Montessori education principles and pedagogy. Yeah, so that's what I did.
Do you have any kind of main findings that you can share from it?
So my overarching goal was to seek alignments between the Montessori educational environment and what autistic children and young people need in an educational setting. That was my overarching goal. So I did that. I did make a table of alignments, and I mean, it'd be too much to go through to talk to you about.
Of course.
I actually should have had a list of all the different aspects, shouldn't I? That would have been helpful. But from the parents' questionnaire, there was, I think I said before, the majority of them experiencing distress at school and are still on roll but don't have any educational provision. And so because my focus was on children who internalize their anxiety, I wondered if there was a correlation between the ones that go under the radar and don't get the provision that they need because they're not a bother, like they're not really noticed and things like that. I explored that a little bit. So one of the quite significant things that came out of it, because it was qualitative, it wasn't I don't have numbers to give you, it's just lots of parents' comments and that I analysed thematically and things like that. But I had those 4 themes that emerged about what was disabling, and fear is quite I did question whether sending children to a place where they feel so frightened, because a lot of the language in the literature is about, if you look at the supports that children are offered at school, it's exit cards, it's removal from the learning environment, essentially, to a quiet place. And they all reduced timetables. They might all be very helpful in the short term, but then it leads you to question the inclusivity of that environment in the first place. If those children are feeling so overwhelmed that they have to leave it, or they can't go every day. So is that inclusion? Yeah. So I did talk quite a bit about inclusion there. But one of the things that the parents said was every child, so all 34 of them, experienced mental health issues due to their experiences at school. And all of the parents aligned that, said that the anxiety was caused by the school environment, not an outside thing. So I wasn't just a yes and no question. It was you could pick different things, and the vast majority of them, or all of them, said it was caused by the actual school environment itself. So and all but one child needed mental health support through counselling, therapy, or other services because of the distress they'd experienced from school. So some of the comments were quite harrowing, actually.
I can imagine,
and it actually, there is a little bit of other research out there where parents have given their experiences through word responses. And it's all quite harrowing. So what I'm trying to say from it is that all these little adjustments that you can make, they might help, they might not help. For the vast majority of parents in my study, they didn't help, and their children were still unable to go to school or be okay at school, even with all of those adjustments. So I'm pretty much saying that the environment needs to change and build an inclusive environment needs to be built from the ground up, with the children in mind, rather than getting children to fit into a situation that is overwhelming for them, that they can't cope with. And the prevalence of fear that came up in my research as well, and in other research as well, that these children feel in that environment, is that okay? Are we okay sending children to an environment like that where they are so frightened and scared? Because if you think about safeguarding, if you flip it, if you were, I think you know what I'm going to say. if a child was not wanting to go home from school in that much distress, that would be a safeguarding issue, wouldn't it? But the other way around, it's, bring them in regardless, drag them in their pajamas, leave them at the gates and go, that kind of thing. Why is that okay? So the research was about just pointing to these facts, questioning the inclusivity of the mainstream environment, aligning the Montessori environment to what autistic learners might need or what would be considered more enabling. So, and getting parent perspectives of their experience, and then putting my own personal experience into it.
Yeah. And I think that's an important element to add as well, because you bringing your personal experience into it really helps give that element of understanding from the researcher as well. So as an outsider reading the research, we know the position that you're coming from.
Yeah.
And I think your research sounds incredibly valuable. What's next? Do you have plans to continue along this thread and research more, or where do you want to go with this?
I would like to do more research. I'm not sure in what capacity. I'm not in a position at the minute to go on to doing a doctorate or doctoral studies. But I just want to talk about it more and get it out there more, and make people aware of what Montessori education is and what it can offer, particularly for these children who can't manage in a mainstream school and don't have access to other types of schooling, and just try and raise awareness about it, really. I'm looking to do a book proposal, and hopefully I can write something based on the research that I've done and my own lived experience of having experience of both environments, and talking about that. But that one thing I wanted to say, which I just didn't mention, was that there's not a great deal of there is a lot of research on Montessori education as far as outcomes and its alignments to psychological development and all of that, but it's based in the US mainly. There's not a lot in the UK. There's a little bit, but not a lot.
Okay.
And what I found in my research, which I didn't know actually when I started, was that Montessori education has been aligned with trauma-informed practice, the frameworks of trauma-informed practice, early intervention frameworks, children with disabilities frameworks, and that's all in the US. So I felt quite excited about making alignments between good autism practice as well with it, because that's something that can go along with those other things, because it's all very, similar. But I've done it in a UK context, which is quite nice because all of that is American. And the other thing this is the actual title of my research, the Montessori environment as an actualized model of inclusion, because there's all this information out there about the 8 principles of good autism practice, and there's others. There's universal design for learning. Have you heard of universal design for learning? It's an American framework again. How to make your learning environments more inclusive. But they're all quite abstract kind of concepts, so they're ideas, and then you think, well, how do I implement those ideas, and what does that look like in practice?
Relate into practice.
There isn't actually a model that shows you how does this look, in practice. So I've suggested that the Montessori environment could stand as a naturalized model of those things, because if they align. I'd need to put a caveat on it though. It's not a silver bullet and it's not a magic wand, because the teachers do need to have good understanding and training as well, just as any other teacher, about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and autism and everything. So it's not like put your child in a Montessori school and it will all just magically work.
Fix everything.
And because it depends on the quality of the setting, it depends on the training of the teachers, it depends on the the understanding of the teachers and their ability to adapt certain things as well, because it is a significant adaptation already from mainstream, but still might need to be further adaptations.
There are lots of different elements to consider, isn't there? With anything with education, like everything, there are multiple facets to consider when feeding into the education of a child, the emotional support of a child, the development of a child, all of these things. It's not just one straight answer and one straight way of doing things for everybody.
No, it's not, and that's the other thing. So I've focused on this particular subgroup of autistic learners, and then children with PDA, autistic children with PDA. I don't know, would it suit them? I don't know. Perhaps they need much more of a self-directed learning environment without the boundaries that Montessori has, without the structure that Montessori has, with more open-ended, maybe. So, like you're saying, it doesn't mean that it will suit everybody. I'm just putting it out there as in theory, it looks like it has good alignments to what good autism practice is outlined as being. So yeah, I just put that caveat there that I'm not saying it's a magic wand and it will fix things for everybody, but it's a start.
Yeah. Have you got any advice in terms of where people can find out more around this sort of topic? I imagine there's like a website for good autism practice. Are there good Montessori websites that you'd recommend?
So because Montessori is global and it's variable in its quality, I would start with the AMI, which is the Association Montessori International. Okay. If I say it with I can't say it with a French accent. AMI. That is the organisation that Maria Montessori set up herself, and that continues to be the world recognised regulatory body of Montessori principles and practice. There are others around the world. There's an American Montessori Society, so there's lots of others. And the one in England is called the Maria Montessori Institute, so the MMI, and that aligns with AMI. Here we go with all the letters again.
No, I was going to say.
So to find out a bit more about what Montessori is, you can look at those two websites, the Maria Montessori Institute and the Association Montessori International. Also, Angeline Lillard is kind of the world leading researcher on Montessori education. She's a psychologist in the US, and she's written a book. I didn't have it with me. It's called The Science Behind the Genius. So that's quite an in-depth book. There are lots of other books out there, but I remember when I first started teaching in the Montessori school, I spent 5 years finding out more and more. It's so deep and there's so much to it that you'll have questions all for a long time. It's because it's so different to what you're kind of used to. But that's a start for that. And for autism, I mean, there's so many different groups for autism, but the National Autistic Society to start with, and the Autism Education Trust, there's lots of resources on there to find out more about autism in education and autism in general. And for school, if you're for children experiencing difficulty attending school, Define Fine, like I mentioned before, is on Facebook.
Oh yes.
So that's a good place to begin for information on what do I do about this. So there's people joining. There's more than 7,000 members on there, and there's new people asking to join every day because their children are really struggling at school. So and Define Fine is nationwide, and they work with lots of different local authorities across the country. They're developing CPD and training courses on EBSA or ABSA with different local authorities. And so the team is made up of different people who run different things in different counties. So that's a place to start for that. Yeah, there isn't really anything about Montessori and autism that you could. I didn't find anything hardly. So I've just maybe I've started something.
There you go. That's what you need to do. Yeah. There's your next step.
Yeah. That is the next step.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really useful for people to know. And what I'll do is I'll pop the links to those places that you've mentioned as well underneath the episode so that people can just click straight through and find them. And I'll do that. But brilliant. So just to bring it to a close, because Recap's all about embracing everyone, making everyone feel at home and part of a supportive community, I do ask all guests to have a think of one piece of advice or an empowering message to give to the listeners to help share this love and support. So if you could say one thing to help even just one person, what would you like to say?
Oh my gosh. Let me think. I would say something from a parenting perspective, because that's what we're talking about. And also it kind of aligns with a bit of a Montessori flavour as well. So one of the things that's kind of helped me in my parenting journey is, and this is not for just if you have a child that's neurodivergent, could be, you know, works for everybody, is this thing between connection and attention. When your child is seeking attention, if you see it as connection, it changes the way that you react or respond. And responding versus reacting, so there's a difference there. So if you see your child as seeking connection, you might respond rather than react. And because we all react from a place of conditioned triggers, don't we? So I think that's something that's really helped me is I heard this, I don't know where I heard it, but it was a little phrase that says, listen to the feelings behind the words. So when your child is saying something or behaving in a particular way, we all know that behavior is communication, but words as well. So they might be trying to articulate something, or they might say something that I listen to the emotion behind, or think about what's going on for them, and that's a tuning into them. And then that was always a little nugget that kind of helped me listen to the feelings behind the words when you're dealing with your children that might be having difficulties or acting up a little bit and you don't know why, what's going on behind the scenes kind of thing. And that will help the way that you respond to them then. And that I think that helps to calm everybody down and just be in the moment, because, you know, moments are fleeting, and that's all we have, isn't it? Just that moment, everything passes. So like me, I've been through this awful experience of, you know, the last few years, and now I'm coming out the other side and it's all good.
Yes. Good. What a nice positive spin to end on as well. Melanie, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us today. I love everything that you stand for with your research. Like I say, I love that link that you've made between the two. So I hope that this isn't the last that we've heard of that research, and that you can go on to develop it and get some things out of it, and maybe even write a book.
Oh, I hope so. That would be great. Thank you, Lucy.
And then we can have you back on to talk about the book as well.
Oh,
so there you go.
Yeah.
That's on your to-do list.
For sure. All right, I'll put that down.
Yes, I'll be checking. No, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much. It was lovely to speak to you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.